Dead America. Tales from the Outer Banks. The Grocery Store. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0. 8:17 p.m. Supercenter Grocery Store, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Madison and Ramona, two 18-year-old cashiers at the Supercenter grocery store, leaned up against the checkout lines, carrying on a conversation while continually looking at the time displayed on their register screens. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and occasional beep of a distant scanner provided the soundtrack to their evening shift. It had been another long, boring shift that was thankfully coming to an end in less than an hour. The summer months were non-stop working as tourists from all over the East Coast flocked to the Outer Banks. In the middle of October, however, the end-of-season crowds were sparse, to put it mildly. Why are we even open until 9 anyway? There's maybe 10 people in here? Madison said, gesturing toward the massive store that stretched on for 15 aisles, filled with every grocery item imaginable. While there were a few more grocery stores scattered around the island, this was by far the biggest and most well-stocked. Her eyes followed her sweeping gesture, taking in the vastness of the empty supermarket. The polished floors reflected the overhead lights, creating the illusion of an even larger space. Most of the checkout lanes were dark, their conveyor belts motionless, a stark contrast to the constant movement of the summer season. "Why are you complaining? It's easy money, plus it's not like you have anywhere else to be," Ramona replied, idly adjusting her name tag. Madison's eyebrows shot up. "How do you know?" "Because we both have school in the morning," Ramona said, matter-of-factly, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. Madison rolled her eyes. "Yeah, well, I could have been going to a party or something." Before Ramona could answer, the 3 other members of their team walked up. Sawyer was 17, a star on the football team and built like a linebacker. His older brother Dawson was 19 and looked like a slightly older version of his younger brother. Both had the same broad shoulders and confident swagger that came from being the popular kids in town. Finley was scrawny by comparison, looking like the average 18-year-old that he was. His uniform hung loosely on his frame, and his hair fell slightly into his eyes as he approached. "We all know that there aren't any good parties until this weekend," Dawson announced, leaning against the counter with casual confidence. Finley perked up, curiosity evident in his expression. "Wait, what's going on this weekend?" "Johnny's parents are out of town, so he's throwing a party after the game on Friday," Sawyer explained, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "I hadn't heard that," Finley said, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment that he wasn't in the loop. Ramona gave him a sideways glance. "Probably because you're not popular enough to get invited." Finley's demeanor dropped a bit at the insult, his shoulders slumping slightly as he averted his gaze. Sawyer glared at Ramona, who let out a sigh in response, recognizing she'd gone too far. "But you know what, Finley? One way to get popular is to be seen with popular people. So why don't you ride with me to the party?" she offered, her tone surprisingly genuine despite the backhanded nature of the invitation. Dawson snorted. How would that help him? Ramona flipped Dawson off, prompting a laugh from everybody else. Meanwhile, Finley's demeanor perked up, a smile spreading across his face as he looked at Ramona with gratitude. "That sounds awesome, Ramona, thank you," he said, his entire posture changing with the unexpected invite. "Don't mention it," Ramona replied with a casual shrug, though there was a softness in her eyes that suggested she was pleased with his reaction. Just then, a loud voice came booming over the speakers in the store, causing all 5 teenagers to jump slightly. "Unless you all start doing some work, nobody is going to that party because I'm going to schedule you all for inventory," Gail announced, her voice echoing through the nearly empty store. The 5 teenagers perked up and began looking busy at the sound of Gail's voice. She was their closing manager and a few years older than them at 25. However, she was still young enough to remember what it was like to be working a dead-end job at that age, so she let a lot slide. From her vantage point in the elevated office overlooking the checkout area, she could monitor the entire front end without having to be physically present. "Sorry, Gail," Dawson called out, waving up to the office that overlooked the checkout line. He immediately began straightening items in the impulse buy racks near his register. "Yeah, I'll run out and see if I can round up some carts," Sawyer offered, already moving toward the entrance. Gale gave him a thumbs up as the young man walked towards the set of sliding double doors that led straight out into the parking lot. He nodded to a couple of customers who were walking in as he stepped outside into the cool October evening. The automatic doors slid closed behind him with a soft hiss, muffling the generic grocery store music that had been playing on an endless loop since his shift began. The sudden quiet was a welcome relief, broken only by the distant sound of cars passing on the main road. Sawyer stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, leaning back and cracking his back. While he was a lot more physically fit than most, the hours on the football field were beginning to take their toll on his body. Each practice seemed to leave a new ache or pain, though he'd never admit that to his coach or teammates. "Come on, man, you're too young to be hurting like this," he muttered to himself, wincing slightly as his spine popped audibly. Sawyer looked out over the parking lot, spotting a smattering of cars parked in the vast sea of empty spaces. The cart return on the right was completely full, eliciting a sigh from the teenager. The metal carts gleamed under the harsh parking lot lights, creating long shadows across the asphalt. "I swear, can't you people stop being so lazy?" he grumbled, shaking his head at the thought of having to make multiple trips to clear the overflowing return area. Sawyer began to walk out to retrieve the carts, but heard stumbling footsteps coming from the shadows against the building. He spun around, his heart rate immediately spiking as he spotted a figure staggering towards him from the darkness. The man emerged slowly from the shadows, his form gradually becoming more distinct against the brightly lit storefront. Sawyer let out a sigh of relief once he recognized the man's familiar, weathered face. "Damn, Bert, you nearly gave me a heart attack," Sawyer said, placing a hand over his chest dramatically. Bert was a regular in the area, one of the nicest people imaginable, just one of those who fell on hard times after falling in love with the bottle. Normally, his appearance wasn't too bad, as the workers at the store would give him enough change to do a load of laundry every now and then. Sometimes he'd even help them with cart retrieval or other small tasks in exchange for a few dollars or a sandwich from the deli. Tonight, however, Sawyer could see that something was wrong. Bert's shirt was covered in blood, which was matting in his long beard. His normally friendly eyes were glassy and unfocused, darting around as if seeing things that weren't there. "Bert, are you all right?" Sawyer asked, concern immediately replacing his initial alarm. Bert staggered a little further into the light, revealing that he was holding a wound on his shoulder, close to the nape of his neck. Sawyer recoiled at the sight before stepping forward, wanting to help him out. The wound looked serious, deep and raw, with blood still seeping between Bert's dirty fingers as he clutched at it. Bert was terrified, flinching as Sawyer took a step towards him. His breathing was ragged, and a low whimper escaped his lips as he backed away slightly. "Relax, Bert, I'm not going to hurt you," Sawyer said softly, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture. The homeless man's reaction was alarming. Bert had always been comfortable around the store staff, especially Sawyer. Sawyer took another step, spooking Bert, who darted inside the store. His movements weren't great, clearly suffering from the injury. He moved with the erratic gait of someone who was either in tremendous pain or possibly in shock. Sawyer stood there in shock for a moment, trying to wrap his head around what just happened. The sight of all that blood had been jarring, but Bert's fear was even more disturbing. Finally, he shook it off and followed Bert inside. As he stepped through the door, he looked over to the others, who were confused at what they just saw. "Was that Bert?" Dawson asked, squinting to get a better look as the homeless man disappeared down one of the aisles. "Yeah, it was," Sawyer confirmed, his voice tight with concern. Finley leaned forward, his expression uneasy. "He didn't look good." "I think somebody hurt him," Sawyer said, his mind already racing through the possibilities of what could have happened. Before they could continue, they heard a woman scream from the produce section, which was in the direction that Bert had walked towards. The sound cut through the store like a knife, causing several customers to look up in alarm. Gale stepped out of the office, yelling out from the elevated platform. "Sawyer, go see what Bert is doing," she commanded, already moving toward the stairs. Sawyer snapped into the moment, moving at a brisk pace towards the produce section. The fluorescent lights seemed suddenly harsh and clinical as he hurried past displays of cereal and canned goods. His footsteps echoed on the polished floors, the sound somehow ominous in the otherwise quiet store. He came around the corner to see 5 people standing around Bert, who had collapsed to the ground. The homeless man lay motionless beside a display of apples, several of which had fallen and rolled across the floor when he fell. A middle-aged woman took a knee beside him, putting her fingers to his wrist with practiced movements that suggested some medical training. "I can't get a pulse. Somebody call 911, she announced, her voice steady despite the urgency of her words. Sawyer stepped over to the scene, gently pushing a couple people out of the way. The small crowd parted easily, allowing him through. The smell hit him immediately, a metallic tang of blood mixed with the sour odor of unwashed clothes. "What happened?" Sawyer asked, kneeling down opposite the woman. "I don't know, he just walked over here and fell down. I thought he passed out, and then I saw his shoulder," the woman explained, gesturing towards the injured shoulder. It was a gruesome wound. It looked as though something had taken a bite out of him. The blood pooled on the floor beneath him, spreading slowly across the white tiles. Sawyer had to fight the urge to gag at the sight, the reality of the injury far worse up close than it had appeared outside. Sawyer looked down at the older man, mentally willing him to get back up. Bert had always been kind to Sawyer, helping him out with the carts for a couple of bucks, even when it was raining out. He hated to see him like that, vulnerable and broken on the cold floor, surrounded by strangers. One of the men standing around the fallen man hung his cell phone up in frustration, his face tight with concern. "I tried 911, but there's no answer," he announced, looking around as if someone else might have a solution. The woman looked up in disbelief. "How can that be?" "My manager has a direct number. I'll have her call," Sawyer offered, already turning to run back to the front of the store. He took 2 steps before the woman's voice stopped him dead in his tracks. He's moving, she called out, excitement and relief evident in her tone. Sawyer turned around, looking through the crowd as Bert began to move again. At first it was subtle movement, a twitch of his fingers, a slight shift of his head. The people around him backed up slightly, giving him space to sit up. The woman remained close, ready to assist him. In an instant, the homeless man moved faster than a lightning strike. The sudden burst of movement was so unexpected that nobody had time to react. Bert lunged forward with unnatural speed and strength, his body seeming to defy the laws of physics as he surged upward. Sawyer couldn't see exactly what happened next, only that Bert lunged towards the woman, who let out a blood-curdling scream that would haunt Sawyer's dreams for years to come, if he lived long enough to have them. "Oh, God help me." Chapter 2. The woman continued to scream as the reanimated Bert attacked her. Her voice shattered the quiet grocery store atmosphere, transforming the mundane space into a scene of abject terror. One of the men standing nearby went to her aid, but from Sawyer's vantage point, it was difficult to see, as the crowd had turned and began running away from the confrontation. People pushed past each other in panic, knocking over displays and dropping their grocery baskets in their desperate attempt to escape. The sounds of falling produce, scattering cans, and panicked breathing created a chaotic soundtrack to the unfolding horror. Sawyer stood his ground, trying to step out of the way of the panicked customers that were running. His feet remained rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. However, one larger man ran into the young bagger. The impact was forceful enough to send Sawyer tumbling to the ground, his head bouncing off the side of a produce display with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through Sawyer's skull as he fell to the ground in a daze, his mind foggy from the blow. The bright fluorescent lights above him seemed to pulse and swim in his vision. While it wasn't enough to give him a concussion, it was strong enough to daze him. He struggled to regain focus, in his eyes, as he looked towards the confrontation, blinking away the spots dancing across his field of vision. Bert was on top of the woman, his legs on the ground, arms on her chest, as his head hovered over hers. Her blonde hair was splayed out across the white tile floor, now stained with streaks of crimson. She let out a scream, which turned to gurgling, as the male customer who stayed behind grabbed onto the back of Bert's shirt, trying to pull him off. "Get off her!" the man shouted, his voice cracking with the effort as he struggled to separate Bert from the woman, His face was contorted in a mixture of fear and determination as he hauled backward on the homeless man's filthy clothing. Once the zombified Bert was a couple feet away from his prey, Sawyer got a good look at him. The gentle man he had known was gone, replaced by a ravenous creature that was chewing on a chunk of the woman's flesh. Blood dripped from his matted beard and his eyes were vacant, devoid of any recognition or humanity. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, that Sawyer found himself wondering if the kind old man he'd known had ever really existed. As the helpful man pulled harder on Bert, trying to get the creature away from the injured woman, the zombified homeless man spun around with unnatural speed, finding a new target in the helper. The motion was fluid but wrong somehow, like a puppet being controlled by strings. The man didn't have time to react, the zombie latching onto his arm, biting down forcefully. The man let out a pained scream as he began punching the zombified Bert in the head, trying to get him to let go. Each impact made a dull thudding sound, but seemed to have no effect on Bert, who continued to tear at the man's flesh with single-minded focus. "Get off him, Bert," Sawyer spoke meekly, his head still reeling from the blow he took as he fell. The words felt hollow and ineffectual even as they left his lips. He tried to pull himself up to his feet, only to stumble back down to one knee, as the signals from his brain weren't reaching his legs fully. His vision swam, the floor seeming to tilt beneath him as he fought against the disorientation. The woman on the floor had stopped moving, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. A spreading pool of blood surrounded her head like a macabre halo, soaking into her clothing and hair. The sight of her motionless form sent a jolt of reality through Sawyer's muddled thoughts. This wasn't just a fight. Someone had just died right in front of him. Sawyer looked over to the man, who was still struggling with the zombified Bert. The two of them spun around, the man doing everything he could to keep the creature off of him. Blood streamed down his arm where Bert had bitten him, staining his white shirt sleeve crimson. As he was pushed back, however, he tripped over the body of the woman that was bleeding out on the ground. The man let out a scream as he fell back, landing hard on the ground, the ghoul right on top of him. His head cracked against the tile, momentarily stunning him and giving Bert the opening he needed. The zombie descended on him with frightening speed, teeth bared. "Bert! Stop it, Bert!" Sawyer shouted, his voice finally finding some strength. He willed himself up to his feet, but his head injury made it difficult. The world tilted and swayed around him as he struggled to maintain his balance. He flinched as a set of hands grabbed him from behind, but quickly relaxed when he saw that it was Dawson. "What the hell is going on? Are you okay?" Dawson asked, his eyes wide as he steadied Sawyer with a firm grip on his shoulders. Concern and confusion warred on his face as he quickly assessed his younger brother for signs of serious injury. "Bert, something's wrong with him," Sawyer managed, gesturing weakly toward the ongoing attack. The understatement of the century, his mind registered distantly. Dawson looked over just in time to see Bert biting into the customer's neck, tearing away a chunk of flesh with savage efficiency. Blood sprayed from the wound, speckling the white floor and nearby produce with crimson droplets. The man's screams gurgled and then faded as his vocal cords were ripped away. "Jesus Christ," Dawson exclaimed, his face draining of color at the grisly scene. Finley ran over to his two friends, stopping beside them and taking in the horror that they were witnessing. His thin frame was visibly trembling, but he remained upright, his eyes locked on the grotesque sight before them. "We need to call the cops," Finley suggested, his voice unnaturally high with panic. The creature heard Finley talk, spinning its head around and letting out a moan at the sight of the three teenagers. Blood and tissue hung from its mouth, giving it a monstrous appearance that bore little resemblance to the homeless man they'd known. It abandoned its victim, who had stopped moving, and fixed its gaze on them with predatory intent. "I don't think he approves of your suggestion," Dawson said, a hint of gallows humor in his voice as the creature staggered to its feet. Despite the quip, his body had tensed, ready for the confrontation that was clearly coming. The zombified Bert leapt to his feet, sprinting towards the three men with shocking speed. It moved with single-minded purpose, arms outstretched and mouth open in a silent snarl. Dawson let his football instincts take over, rushing towards the creature, lowering his shoulder like he was making a tackle in the open field. The impact was brutal. the creature's ribs audibly cracking from Dawson's shoulder slamming into them. The sound was like dry branches snapping, echoing through the now silent store. Rather than drive Bert to the ground, Dawson shoved him back, sending the ghoul flying into a produce display. Apples and oranges cascaded to the floor, rolling in all directions as the display toppled over. The zombie flailed around before falling to the ground in a heap, momentarily stunned by the force of the impact. It twitched among the scattered fruit, limbs jerking in unnatural angles. "Stay down, Bert," Dawson warned, breathing heavily as he maintained a defensive stance. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the store's cool air conditioning. The zombie didn't listen, immediately scrambling back to its feet, rushing towards Dawson with murderous intent. Its movements were jerky but determined, closing the distance with alarming speed. "Oh shit," Dawson muttered, backpedaling slightly as he reassessed his strategy. This wasn't going to be as easy as he'd hoped. Dawson could tell that something wasn't right with the man, and that he would have to get rough with him. The creature got within striking distance again, prompting the young man to reach out and grab the ghoul by the shirt. The fabric was damp with blood and sweat, making it difficult to maintain his grip. Dawson held him at arm's length for a moment, getting a good look at him, seeing the lack of life in Bert's eyes. They were clouded and vacant, like frosted glass, with no recognition or humanity visible. The creature continued snapping its jaw at him, teeth clicking together as it tried desperately to bite any part of Dawson it could reach. "I'm sorry, Bert. I really am," Dawson said, his voice thick with regret. Dawson stepped to the side, using his considerable strength to fling the zombified homeless man towards the ground. The creature's head smacked into the metal edge of a display, cracking the skull with a sound like an egg breaking. Dark blood immediately began to flow from the wound, pooling beneath Bert's head. Bert collapsed to the ground, convulsing for a moment before ultimately falling lifeless. His limbs twitched a few times, then went still. Dawson stared at him for a moment, making sure he was down and feeling pity towards the man. The violent end seemed incongruous with the gentle soul Bert had been. "Dawson, look out!" Finley yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The warning startled Dawson, getting him to turn around just in time to see a new threat. The female customer that Bert had initially attacked was back to her feet, making a beeline towards Dawson. Her throat was torn open, exposing muscle and tissue beneath, and her once blonde hair was now matted with dark, clotting blood. Before the young man could react, the zombie was knocked to the side, its head snapping violently to the left as something struck it with considerable force. The impact was loud in the quiet store, a dull thud followed by the clatter of metal against tile. As it hit the ground, Finley was revealed, standing there with a bloodied can of green beans. His hand shook, clearly in shock from what he just did. His face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief at his own actions. I didn't know what else to do," he stammered, looking to Dawson for reassurance that he'd done the right thing. Dawson looked to the ground, where the woman was bleeding profusely, mostly from her neck wound, but a little from the back of her head where Finley had struck her. Despite the injuries, she kept moving, trying to get up. Her fingers clawed at the tile, leaving smeared trails of blood as she struggled to rise. There was something deeply wrong about her movements. They were mechanical and disjointed, like a broken machine trying to function. "Oh, hell no," Dawson said, his voice flat with determination as he realized what needed to be done. Dawson raised his foot up, bringing it down hard on the back of the creature's skull, driving the zombified woman's face into the ground. He could hear her facial bones cracking, but it did little to prevent her from moving. She continued to struggle beneath his foot, seemingly impervious to pain or injury. Dawson looked to the left, spotting a sturdy metal rack that held the plastic bags to put produce in. It was bolted to the side of a display case, but with a firm yank he managed to tear it free. The metal was cold and substantial in his hands, giving him a sense of confidence. He grabbed it, and without thinking, he brought it down onto the back of the creature's head several times. Each impact made a wet, sickening sound that turned Finley's stomach. After the fourth hit, he stopped, staring at the creature to make sure it wasn't moving. The woman's head was now unrecognizable, a ruined mass of tissue and bone fragments. She had finally stopped moving. Both Dawson and Finley watched in silence as blood began pooling underneath the woman, oozing out from multiple sources. Did we just kill a woman?" Finley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think so," Dawson replied, his breathing heavy as the adrenaline began to subside. "Bert did a number on her throat and she was dead when we got here." "Then why was she standing up and attacking us?" Finley pressed. "I make $2 over minimum wage, so that answer is way above my pay grade," Dawson said. Both of them turned back to their friend Sawyer, who was finally back to his feet, the cobwebs clearing in his mind as the initial shock of his head injury began to fade. His balance was still a bit off, but he was able to stand without swaying. "Dude, are you all right?" Dawson asked, moving to his brother's side and placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, just got my bell rung. I'll be all right," Sawyer assured them, though his voice lacked conviction. He looked past his friends to the carnage beyond. The two bodies on the floor, the scattered produce, the smears of blood on the pristine white tile. The scene was so incongruous with the mundane grocery store setting that it took on a dreamlike quality. Before they could talk any further, Ramona's voice blared over the loudspeakers, cutting through the momentary quiet that had fallen over the produce section. "Dawson, Sawyer, please, somebody help me." Chapter 3. A few minutes earlier, Dawson, Finley, Madison, and Ramona stood by the front of the store, all of them confused by what they saw when Bert stumbled into the store. The homeless man's bloodied appearance and erratic behavior had been jarring enough, but Sawyer's immediate pursuit had left them all with uneasy feelings they couldn't quite articulate. Gail stood by the front office door, snapping her fingers to get the foursome's attention. Her practiced managerial expression showed only mild concern, as if Bert's condition was just another hiccup in the daily operation of the store, rather than something truly alarming. "Sawyer will handle whatever is going on over there. Why don't the four of you get working on closing the store down for the night?" she suggested, her tone casual but firm. Madison's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "We're closing early tonight?" "Yeah, I've had my fill of excitement for one day," Gail replied, glancing briefly in the direction Sawyer and Bert had disappeared. Something in her expression betrayed a deeper worry than her words conveyed. Dawson nodded, accepting the task without argument. "All right, Finley. I'll get the carts from the lot if you want to get the push broom out of the back." Before Finley could respond, two customers came up to the registers, each with large carts filled with goods. The two young men looked at each other, letting out a defeated sigh at the sight. "Right after we bag these?" Finley asked with resignation, his thin shoulders slumping slightly. "Yeah, right after we bag these," Dawson confirmed, already moving into position behind Madison's register. The two men got into position as their cashier counterparts began ringing up the orders. They all went through the motions, albeit a little faster than normal since they knew they were closing up early. Madison's fingers flew across the scanner with practiced efficiency, while Ramona handled her own customer with equally brisk movements. Before either girl could get the orders fully rung up, their attention was pulled to the produce section, where a chorus of screams filled the air. The sound was unlike anything they'd heard before in the store. Raw, primal, and unmistakably terrified, everyone turned in that direction, watching a handful of customers running out of the store like a spooked cattle herd. "Damn, it's a stampede," Finley observed, his voice barely above a whisper as he watched the panicked customers flee. Dawson's expression shifted instantly from annoyance to concern. "Something's not right. Sawyer's over there." Without another thought for the groceries, Dawson dropped the 2 boxes of cereal he was bagging up, racing over towards the commotion. His protective big brother instincts overrode everything else. Finley didn't hesitate either, only he kept a can of green beans in his hands as he ran, his mind working completely on instinct. "Hey, my can!" the male customer protested, watching in disbelief as his grocery item was carried away. Finley didn't listen to him, racing off to follow Dawson. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to keep pace with his more athletic friend. Whatever was happening, he knew it wasn't good. "That bagger stole my green beans," the customer complained to Madison, who had remained at her register. Madison gave an apologetic smile, trying to maintain a veneer of normalcy. "I'm sorry, he gets excited sometimes. I tell you what, if you want to grab another can, I'll finish getting you run up." The customer let out a grunt, clearly displeased by the situation before stomping his feet back towards the canned goods aisle. His indignation seemed almost comical given the chaos beginning to unfold around them. Before he could get too far, the other customer that was checking out let out a scream that cut through the air like a knife. Ramona jumped at the ear-piercing sound, looking at the woman with disgust. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her nerves already frayed by the strange events unfolding around them. The woman didn't answer, only pointing out the front door, her hand trembling violently. Ramona turned to see two of the customers who had ran out from produce, struggling with figures that looked human but moved with jerky, unnatural motions. These creatures were attacking the fleeing customers, their movements violent and predatory. "To hell with this, I'm out of here," the male customer who had lost his green beans announced, abandoning his groceries entirely. The man began running towards the door, wanting to be anywhere else but there. His eyes locked onto the people engaged in a fight with what Ramona was beginning to realize weren't people at all, at least not anymore. He darted around them without helping, clearly only concerned for his well-being. The man got onto the parking lot, making it 2 steps off the sidewalk before a sedan plowed into him. The car was going way too fast, sending the man flying before hitting the speed bump and going airborne. The sickening thud of impact reached even those inside the store, followed by the screeching of tires and the crunch of metal as the car crashed into several parked vehicles. Ramona and the customer looked on in horror, both of them frozen in fear. The surreal quality of what they were witnessing made it difficult to process, like watching a movie instead of real life. Madison, however, ran out from her register towards the front door. "We have to close the doors," she shouted, already moving toward the entrance with purposeful strides. Before she could reach them, however, another creature ran in from the parking lot. This one was clearly once a person, but the vacant eyes and bloodied mouth marked it as something else entirely. As soon as it crossed the threshold into the store, it locked eyes onto Madison, who stopped on a dime. "Oh shit," Madison whispered, her face draining of color as she realized her danger. Madison turned and began running in the other direction, the creature in hot pursuit. Her footsteps slapped against the tile floor as she darted through an empty checkout line that was beside Ramona's lane, the creature close behind her. Rather than follow Madison, the creature suddenly turned its attention to the customer still in Ramona's line. Perhaps it was the proximity, or perhaps it was the woman's panicked whimpering that drew its notice. The woman let out a scream as the creature tackled her to the ground, biting into her neck with savage efficiency. Blood immediately began to pool on the white tile floor, spreading outward in a rapidly expanding crimson circle. Ramona ducked down behind the checkout line, fear completely overtaking her. Her heart hammered in her chest so loudly she was certain it would give away her position. She pressed herself against the cool metal of the register stand, making herself as small as possible while the sounds of the attack continued just feet away. She heard Gail yell out as she raced towards the back from the office, her voice cutting through the chaos with authoritative urgency. "Get to the storeroom," Gail commanded, her footsteps retreating quickly as she ran toward the relative safety of the back area. Ramona forced herself to get up, her legs trembling beneath her. She had only risen a few inches when she was forced to duck back down as another creature ran from the front door over to her register. The only thing saving the young woman from death was the creature running into the edge of the bagging area. It clawed at the obstruction, trying to reach her with single-minded determination. Ramona reached for the intercom, her fingers fumbling with the receiver as she tried to keep an eye on the creature attempting to reach her. She hit the button and yelled out with all the desperation she could muster. "Dawson, Sawyer, please, somebody help me," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. She dropped the receiver, looking around for anything she could use as a weapon. Most of the things within reach were useless: plastic bags, receipt paper, pens. But her frantic gaze landed on a fire extinguisher mounted on the nearby wall. She grabbed it, gripping the makeshift weapon tightly as the creature continued reaching out for her, its fingers scraping against the counter that separated them. She stared at the zombie, which had numerous bite marks on its arms and neck area. The human that the creature used to be couldn't have been much older than Ramona. Maybe a year or two. That fact seemed to disturb her even more than the blood and gore. The creature's vacant eyes stared through her rather than at her, and its mouth worked constantly, opening and closing as if practicing for its next bite. A low guttural moan escaped its throat, a sound no human vocal cords should be able to produce. Ramona didn't have to look at the creature much longer, as Finley came running in from the direction of the produce section. He swung his bloody can of green beans as hard as he could, catching the zombie in the side of the head with a sickening thud. The creature fell to the ground from the impact, momentarily stunned but still moving. Finley didn't hesitate. He followed it down, straddling the thrashing creature. He raised his can up high before crashing it down on the creature's head several times, blood spurting up from the attack. Each impact made a wet, crunching sound that turned Ramona's stomach, but she couldn't look away. Finley finally popped up, breathing heavily from the exertion, his shirt and face spattered with dark blood. He looked behind the register, spotting Ramona crouched in her hiding place. He reached his hand out for her, urgency written across his normally calm features. "Come on, we have to move," he shouted, his eyes constantly darting around for any new threats. Ramona didn't hesitate, leaping to her feet and grabbing onto Finley's hand as he pulled her over the bagging area. She landed on her feet beside him, both of them looking down the aisle at the customer being fed on by the zombie that had attacked her. The woman had stopped moving, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling while the creature continued to tear at her flesh. Finley kept a firm grip on Ramona's hand, leading her down a couple of checkout aisles before making the turn towards the back of the store. His hand was slick with sweat or blood or both, but Ramona held on as if her life depended on it, which it very well might. Ramona peeked behind her, spotting a few more zombies coming into the store from the parking lot, looking around for something to attack. The automatic doors were stuck open, allowing an unimpeded flow of the creatures into the store. It was as if they were drawn to the location, perhaps by the sounds of struggle or the scent of fresh prey. "Just keep moving, we're almost there," Finley encouraged, his voice strained but determined as he pulled Ramona along. The two of them got to the back aisle, just a few yards away from the storeroom door. The corridor stretched out before them, lined with bulk items and cleaning supplies. It should have been a straight shot to safety, but fate had other plans. 10 yards on the other side of the storeroom, they saw 3 zombies that locked onto them the moment they appeared. Their eyes fixed on Finley and Ramona in an instant, and they began moving toward them with surprising speed. "Run, run!" Finley shouted, his voice cracking with panic as he pulled Ramona along towards the storeroom door. They sprinted down the aisle, their footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. Shelves blurred past them as they ran, their lungs burning with the effort. The zombies gained ground with each passing second, their inhuman moans growing louder as the distance closed. We're outside," Finley yelled. Finley reached the storeroom door first, pushing on it with his free hand, only to feel resistance. The door refused to yield, apparently barricaded from the inside. Terror gripped him as he realized they might be trapped. He smacked his hand on it a couple times, glancing over to the side, watching the zombies getting closer to them. They were close enough now that he could smell the metallic tang of blood that clung to them like a gruesome perfume. "Let us in!" Ramona screamed, her voice cracking with desperation as she pounded on the unyielding door. "Please!" Before the ghouls reached them, however, the door was pulled open just enough to create a gap. Dawson's face appeared in the opening, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of his friends and the approaching danger. Without hesitation, he reached out, grabbing Finley by the shirt, pulling him inside the back room with surprising strength. Finley kept his grip on Ramona's hand, pulling her inside as well. The momentum sent them both stumbling into the storeroom, nearly falling to the floor before catching themselves on a nearby shelf. The familiar scents of cardboard and cleaning supplies were momentarily the most welcome smells in the world. Dawson slammed the door shut just before the zombies reached it. The former football player put his entire weight against the door, holding it in place as the ghouls smacked their hands against it. The thick metal barrier shuddered with each impact, but held firm under Dawson's weight. Chapter 4. The thick metal barrier shuddered with each impact, but held firm under Dawson's weight. He continued using his full weight against the swinging doors, holding them in place while some of the others were busy using hand trucks to move heavy boxes. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he braced himself against the next impact, his muscles straining with the effort. Gale, Madison, and Sawyer strained as they moved the boxes of canned goods over to the door. The metal wheels of the hand truck squeaked against the concrete floor as they navigated around the shelving units of the storeroom. The box they pushed contained dozens of cans, making it incredibly heavy but perfect for their current need. Come on, Dawson urged, his voice tight with exertion as he continued to hold the door. The pounding from the other side had become more insistent, the creatures somehow sensing fresh prey just beyond their reach. Madison shot him an irritated look as she pushed with all her strength. We're working on it, Dawson. Finley rushed over to help them once he realized what they were doing, leaving Ramona, who was in a bit of shock. Her eyes were wide and unfocused as she leaned against a shelf, her mind struggling to process the horrors she had witnessed. Finley glanced back at her with concern, but knew the immediate priority was securing the door. It took them a moment to get the box over to the door, dropping it down right in front of Dawson, the four of them getting ready to push. The metal hand truck clattered to the floor as they positioned themselves around the heavy container. Haul it out, Dawson, Gale instructed, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. The young man nodded, preparing to move out of the way. He put both his hands on the door, keeping them on it as he started moving to the side. The metal groaned under the pressure from the other side, threatening to give way the moment he released his hold. Ready, now, Dawson shouted as he made his final move. As soon as he was clear, the four others pushed the box into position, managing to get it into place before the creatures on the other side could get through. The heavy case slid into place with a satisfying thud, creating a solid barrier against the threat. The door still rattled with each impact, but the box held firm, not budging an inch despite the onslaught. Dawson stared at the door for a moment, making sure it wasn't going anywhere before pointing to another box. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes were alert and focused. Let me have the hand truck. I'll get a few more over there, he said, already moving to retrieve the tool. Gale was winded and was in no position to tell him no. She gestured towards the storeroom broadly, her face flushed with exertion. Have at it, young man. The others stepped back, giving Dawson room to work. The storeroom was cavernous, filled with towering shelves of merchandise waiting to be moved to the sales floor. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast everything in a cold, clinical glow, creating sharp shadows in the corners. The constant pounding on the door provided a rhythmic backdrop to their movements, a grim reminder of what awaited them if their barricade failed. Finley walked over to Ramona, who was still in a state of shock. Her arms were wrapped around herself in a protective gesture, and her gaze remained distant, seeing horrors that were still playing out in her mind rather than the storeroom around her. Hey, are you okay? Finley asked softly, his voice gentle with concern. He gently touched her on the shoulder, and immediately she turned to him and threw her arms around him. The sudden movement caught him off guard, but he quickly recovered, wrapping his arms around her trembling form. She held on tight, whispering in his ear with a voice that cracked with emotion. Thank you for coming back for me, thank you for coming back for me, she repeated, her words muffled against his shoulder. Finley rubbed her back, trying to get her to calm down. His hand moved in small, soothing circles as he felt her shuddering breaths begin to slow. Of course, I'm not going to leave you behind. You're my ticket to being popular. Finley's tone was playful, hoping it would help Ramona break out of her shock. His ploy was successful as she let out a laugh, pulling him closer for a moment before leaning back to look him in the eye. The sound of her laughter, however brief, seemed to cut through the tension in the room, offering a momentary respite from the horror. Oh, you're definitely popular with me, she said, with a smile that brightened her entire face. She smiled broadly as the two of them locked eyes. In the midst of chaos, they had found a small moment of connection that seemed to anchor them both. Madison, however, had enough of the display, speaking up with an edge to her voice. Not to break the mood or anything, but what in the hell is going on? Madison demanded, her arms crossed over her chest as she leaned against a shelf. The question was directed at no one in particular, but carried the weight of what they all were thinking. Gale ran a hand through her hair, pushing it back from her face as she turned to Sawyer. I don't know. Sawyer, what happened with Bert? Sawyer rubbed his head, the cobwebs beginning to clear from the blow to his head. His fingers gingerly probed the tender spot where he'd collided with the display, wincing slightly at the touch. I don't know, Gale. One second he was dead on the ground, the next he was biting that poor woman, he explained, his voice hollow with disbelief at his own words. Madison's eyes widened. So, he wasn't dead then? I don't know, Madison, Sawyer replied, frustration evident in his tone. There was a lot of blood. He stopped moving. And then, he didn't. This is crazy, Madison said, shaking her head as if the motion might somehow make sense of what they'd witnessed. I know what I saw, Madison. Sawyer's voice rose in volume. I've known Bert for a year now, and even on his best day he didn't move all that great. I've never seen him moving like that. That revelation caused Madison to quiet down, not sure of how to respond. The implications of what Sawyer was saying hung in the air, too terrifying to fully acknowledge, but impossible to ignore. Does anybody have their phones on them? Gale asked. Everybody stopped and stared at Gale, who had recently implemented a new store rule where all phones were to be locked up in the office during your shift. The looks they gave her told her the answer before anyone had to speak. Well, it's not like you guys follow my rules, Gale said with a hint of defeated humor. Of course, that would be the one that you took seriously. Is there not a phone back here? Finley asked, still standing close to Ramona, who seemed reluctant to let go of his arm. Gale thought for a moment before scanning the walls. It took a moment before she spotted a landline mounted on the wall near the loading dock entrance. She ran over to it, picking it up and hearing nothing but a dead signal. She dropped the receiver, letting out a defeated sigh. That's right, the company cut costs, which meant cutting extra landlines. The only one left is in the office, she explained, frustration evident in her voice. You should still be able to call 911, Finley pointed out. Gale looked at him curiously, surprised by his knowledge. It's not my fault I know things, Finley defended himself with a shrug. It's a law. All phones connected to the grid have to be able to call emergency services. Gale shrugged, trying it out, but it was of no use. The entire line was disconnected. She placed the receiver back in its cradle with more force than necessary, the plastic making a sharp clacking sound. Still no signal, she reported grimly. I don't think it would matter anyway, Sawyer said, his tone flat as he leaned against a shelf for support. Madison turned to him, her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Before I got knocked on my ass, one of the customers said he couldn't get an answer after calling 911, Sawyer explained, the implication of his words settling over the group like a heavy blanket. Maybe he dialed it wrong, Ramona suggested, her voice small but hopeful. Madison scoffed, some of her usual attitude returning despite the circumstances. Are you kidding me, girl? How do you mess up 3 numbers? Think about how stupid half the people who come in here are and tell me you don't think someone could screw up dialing 911, Ramona countered, a flash of her normal personality breaking through the shock. Madison thought for a moment to every stupid question a customer had asked them over the months they'd worked together. Her expression shifted as she recalled some particularly egregious examples. Yeah, I did have that one woman who asked me if the salmon was grass-fed, Madison admitted, drawing a few nervous chuckles from the group. Dumbasses aside, I think we have to assume that he didn't get an answer, Finley interjected, his tone serious as he brought them back to the gravity of their situation. Why do you say that? Madison asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Well, because the way I see it, we're trapped inside the storeroom with no way to contact the outside world. Through that door we have crazy people who want to rip us to shreds in the store, Finley said, gesturing toward the barricaded entrance. And out the other door we have the loading dock, and God only knows what waiting for us. Now, assuming 911 is still around, all we have to do is kick back and wait for someone to come rescue us. However, given how we just saw half a dozen people murdered and have yet to hear any sirens of any kind, I tend to believe that they might be busy at the moment. Or, worse, not there at all, in which case we need to do something other than sitting on our asses. Everyone stared at Finley, who had shown more emotion in the last 30 seconds than he had in the 6 months he had been working there. His normally reserved demeanor had given way to an unexpected assertiveness that commanded attention. Finley's right. We can't just sit back and hope that someone is coming to help us, Dawson agreed, returning from positioning another box against the door. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, leaving a smear of dirt across his forehead. So what do we do? Madison asked, looking from face to face for any sign of a plan. "My phone is in my truck," Sawyer offered, his voice still slightly unsteady from his injury. Dawson perked up at this information. "Where did you park?" "The side of the building," Sawyer replied, pushing himself off the shelf to stand a bit straighter. "Let me get the keys," Dawson said, moving toward his brother with purpose in his stride. Sawyer nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his keys. "I'll go with you." Sawyer tossed the keys over to his brother, missing badly. The keys clattered on the ground, the metallic ping echoing through the cavernous storeroom. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Yeah, but I might need a minute before we do," Sawyer admitted, rubbing the side of his head as he sat down on a box. "I'm sorry, man, my head is still not right," he apologized, frustration evident in his voice. He hated feeling vulnerable, especially when others were depending on him. "It's all good. I'll get there and get back before you know it," Dawson assured him, bending down to retrieve the keys. He pocketed them and turned toward the loading dock exit. "I'll come with you," Finley volunteered, stepping forward with unexpected confidence. Dawson looked at Finley in disbelief. He shook his head, not thrilled with the plan. The contrast between their physical builds was stark. Dawson with his football player physique and Finley with his slender frame. "I know you went to town on that woman's head with the green beans, but don't let that go to your head," Dawson warned, skepticism evident in his tone. Finley stared down the considerably bigger Dawson before stepping over to the corner. A second later, he reached down, grabbing a crowbar, tossing it in the air before catching it with a dramatic flare. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, looking both utilitarian and deadly. "If there's more than two of those people out there, you're going to need help. I may not be able to tackle one, but I can sure as hell crack it in the side of the head with this bad boy," Finley declared, a new confidence evident in his stance. Finley gave a mostly convincing swing across his body, generating enough force to show he had what it took. The whoosh of the crowbar cutting through the air was followed by an approving nod from Dawson. "All right, but you stick close to me and do what I tell you," Dawson conceded. "I can do that," Finley agreed, gripping the crowbar with renewed determination. "Good. Let's move." Chapter 5. Dawson and Finley moved over to the back door of the storeroom that was at the corner of the building. The metal door was heavy and industrial, designed to keep intruders out, not the living dead. Dawson began removing the metal bar that secured it, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere of the storeroom. Before he could open it, however, Gail walked over, putting her hand against the door. Her face was set with determination, the managerial authority she normally carried, now amplified by genuine concern. "I don't think this is a good idea," she said, her voice firm but tinged with worry. Dawson looked up at her, frustration evident in his expression. The stress of the situation was wearing on all of them, fraying nerves and shortening tempers. "Then fire us, Gail," he replied sharply. Gail was taken aback by the comeback from Dawson, who immediately recognized he was harsh. His face softened slightly as he saw the hurt flash across her features. She might be their boss, but she was also barely a few years older than them, caught in the same nightmare. "Look, I know tensions are high right now, but if we can't get a phone, we won't know what's going on out there," Dawson explained, his tone more measured. He paused, allowing the weight of their situation to sink in before continuing. "And worse, we can't let anybody know that we're trapped in here." Gail thought about it for a moment, her eyes moving between the door and the barricaded entrance to the store. The pounding on that door had diminished slightly, but hadn't stopped entirely. She realized that Dawson was right. She removed her hand from the door, backing away to let the boys go. "Just be careful," she cautioned, her voice betraying her fear for them. Dawson's expression softened further. "You know me, Gail." "That's why I said be careful. I know it's not in your nature," she replied, with a hint of her usual dry humor, though her eyes remained serious. Dawson contemplated her words for a moment before nodding, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. He'd never been one to err on the side of caution, whether on the football field or elsewhere. "I promise, we'll be careful," he assured her, his tone sincere. Finley, who had been watching the exchange silently, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, we shouldn't be going out the door." Dawson turned to him, brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? How else are we supposed to get outside?" Instead of answering immediately, Finley pointed to the row of bay doors that stretched down to the far end of the storeroom. There were 5 in total, large garage-style entrances where delivery trucks would typically unload their cargo. Bays 2 and 4 were occupied with trucks, the trailers still filled with goods waiting to be unpacked. "We go out Bay 1, Finley suggested, his voice gaining confidence as he developed his idea. "What difference does that make?" Dawson questioned, clearly not following Finley's logic. Finley's eyes lit up with a realization. That thing that was trying to get Ramona. It didn't climb over the bagging area like it didn't realize it was an option. Ramona, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. The color had returned to her face, and her earlier shock seemed to have given way to a more focused state of mind. "He's right," she confirmed, nodding emphatically. "That person ran straight from the door towards me and ran right into the bagging area. I stared at it, and all it did was try and run through it." The memory made her shudder slightly, but she continued. "It just kept pushing against it, like it couldn't understand why it wasn't getting through." Dawson thought for a moment, understanding gradually spreading across his features as he processed the idea. It was a small observation, but potentially crucial, and the first insight they'd had into how these creatures might behave. "So, if we get in trouble out there, we jump up into the bay?" he began, working through the implications. "And they don't try and climb up," Finley finished, a note of triumph in his voice. Dawson nodded slowly, then with increasing conviction. "What the hell? I like it. Come on, give me a hand." Dawson and Finley walked over to the first bay door, unlatching it and gently pulling up on it. The metal door made a little noise as it rolled up, the mechanism creaking slightly from disuse. The boys stopped it halfway up, as they had enough room to get to the ground. Both of them took a knee, along with Gale, the 3 of them looking out into the loading dock area. The night air was cool against their faces, carrying the sense of asphalt and distant smoke. There was a wooden privacy fence 30 yards back, a neighborhood beyond that with scattered lights visible through the tree. To their left was the nearest tractor trailer, the driver leaving it there overnight for it to be unloaded by the morning crew. To their right was the corner of the building, not more than 10 yards away. Much to everyone's relief, they didn't see any zombies in the immediate vicinity. "We move quickly and quietly. Let's do it," Dawson instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. Dawson extended his fist for a bump, which confused Finley for a moment, before he reciprocated, somewhat awkwardly. "Sorry, not used to having those come my way," Finley admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Dawson chuckled before the 2 men dropped down to the ground, the impact sending small jolts through their legs. The concrete was cool and rough beneath their palms as they steadied themselves. They moved up the side of the building cautiously, listening to the chaos coming from the front of the store. They could hear engines running, but no cars were moving. Several moans could be heard, but no screams. A fact that was somehow more disturbing than if there had been cries for help. Dawson led them up to the corner of the building, peeking out towards the highway in the front of the store. The fluorescent lights of the parking lot cast everything in a harsh, unnatural glow that created sharp shadows and made the scene before them all the more surreal. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice thick with horror at what he was seeing. He could see several cars wrecked at the side exit of the parking lot. Someone had taken the turn too quickly, putting their front tire in the ditch, flipping them over. The vehicle lay on its roof, wheels still spinning slowly, headlights pointing at odd angles into the darkness. 2 other vehicles were wrecked just behind them, apparently the first one setting off a chain reaction. One had slammed into a light pole, the hood crumpled like an accordion. The other had spun out and now rested half on the sidewalk, its door hanging open. A small army of zombies congregated around the wreckage, as if they were trying to get at the people trapped inside. Their moans carried on the night air, a chorus of hunger and mindless determination. They clawed at the metal and glass, bloody hands leaving streaks on the surfaces as they sought entry. Dawson shook off the thought, not wanting to contemplate those people's fate. The implications were too horrific to dwell on, especially when they had their own survival to worry about. He motioned for Finley to follow, the 2 of them getting out into the open but doing their best to stay in the shadows of the building. The darkness offered some protection, wrapping around them like a cloak as they moved cautiously forward. Halfway up the building, however, there was a bright security light that illuminated the entire area, as well as Sawyer's truck, which was right in the middle. A gleaming target in a pool of light. "Well, so much for sneaking up on it," Dawson muttered, frustration evident in his tone. Dawson pointed to the truck, Finley shaking his head once he realized what it meant. The security light had eliminated any chance of approaching unnoticed, but there was no turning back now. They'd come too far to retreat empty-handed. The two men moved up as quietly as they could, getting to the edge of the darkness, the truck 5 yards away from them. Finley kept his eye on the zombies 20 yards past the truck, all of them still focused on the wreckage. Their single-minded attention to the crashed vehicles was the only thing preventing them from noticing the two teenagers. Dawson made his move, rushing up to the truck, hitting the unlock button on the key fob. The locks clicked open, however, the headlights flashed, and the horn let out a slight honk, standard features that had never seemed problematic until this moment. A split second later, half a dozen creatures turned and noticed them, their vacant eyes locking onto the movement and light. "Get the phone!" Finley urged, raising his crowbar defensively as the zombies began to move toward them. Dawson ran up to the door, throwing it open and diving inside, rummaging around for the phone. The interior light cast his shadow across the parking lot as he searched frantically, further drawing attention to their position. His hands moved quickly over the seats, checking the center console, the door pockets, anywhere Sawyer might have left his device. Finley stood at the front of the truck, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly, watching one creature break away from the pack, getting ahead of the others. Its mouth hung open, revealing blood-stained teeth that snapped together rhythmically as it approached. Finley put all thought out of his head, stepping up to the zombie and swinging as it approached. The crowbar felt heavy in his hands, but his adrenaline gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. Much to his surprise, the crowbar smacked the ghoul in the side of the head with enough force to crack the skull. The sickening sound of impact was followed by a spray of dark blood that spattered across the asphalt. Dawson looked out of the truck to see Finley giving it another crack on the back of the head, just to make sure. The creature went limp, collapsing at Finley's feet in a heap of unmoving limbs. "I can't find the phone," Dawson called out, his voice tight with frustration as he continued to search the vehicle's interior. His hands moved frantically across the seats and floor, finding nothing but fast food wrappers and spare change. Finley looked back to the mob, which was closing quickly. The lead zombies were less than 15 yards away now, moving with purpose toward the fresh prey they'd discovered. He yelled out, urgency making his voice crack. "Forget it, we have to go." Dawson looked through the window of the truck, seeing the zombies closing quickly. Their forms were silhouetted against the parking lot lights, a wave of shuffling death heading directly for them. "Damn it," he swore, slamming his hand against the steering wheel in frustration. Dawson abandoned the truck, both teenagers running towards the back of the store as the zombies closed the gap. The creatures called out in unintelligible language as they came around the corner, alerting those in the storeroom that trouble was coming. The sounds they made were almost human, but distorted and wrong, like a record being played at the wrong speed. Dawson reached the bay first, his athletic build allowing him to cover ground quickly. He jumped up into the bay first, the lip of it being chest high. His powerful legs propelled him upward, and he rolled into safety with practiced ease. Finley, however, was not blessed with the same physical gifts. He leaped up, not quite making it all the way up. His fingers scrabbled at the edge, barely maintaining a grip as the zombies closed in behind him. Both Sawyer and Ramona grabbed onto his arms, pulling him into the bay just before the zombies reached them. He kicked away from the edge as the ghouls reached up for him, their fingers grasping at air where his feet had been seconds before. Once he knew he was safe, he let out a sigh, leaning back flat onto the concrete floor. His chest heaved with exertion, and he could feel his heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Just as Finley had predicted, the zombies made no attempt to climb up after them. Their moans increased in volume, frustrated by the prey that had escaped them. Ramona rushed over to him, taking a knee, showing genuine concern. Her face was flushed with fear and relief, her eyes wide as she looked him over for any signs of injury. "My God, are you okay?" she asked, her voice thick with worry. "Yeah, I'm good, Ramona," Finley assured her, though his labored breathing suggested it had been a close call. She reached down, grabbing his hand and giving it a squeeze, which gave him some life. "Well, so much for that idea," Dawson said, breaking the moment as he sat down heavily on a nearby box. His frustration was evident, but there was relief in his voice too, relief that they'd made it back alive. Sawyer looked between them, his eyes still slightly unfocused from his earlier injury. "Why didn't you just drive the truck around here?" Dawson gave his brother a "are you kidding me" look that spoke volumes. The simplicity of the suggestion, coming after their narrow escape, was almost comical in its timing. "You know, bro, that would have been a great idea to pitch 5 minutes ago," Dawson replied, his tone caught between sarcasm and genuine regret at not thinking of it himself. Dawson sat down on the concrete floor, everybody falling silent. The only noise echoing in the storeroom was that of the zombies, moaning outside the bay door. Chapter 6. The group stood around the storeroom, contemplating their next move. The failed mission for Sawyer's phone had left them all feeling more trapped than before. The reality of their situation was settling in like a physical weight, pressing down on them with each passing minute. After a few moments, Gale moved over to the open bay door, using a long metal hook to grasp onto it and pull it down, not wanting to risk getting within reach of the zombies just outside. The creatures' moans were still audible, as if they were frustrated that they couldn't feast on the survivors. "So what do we do now?" Madison asked, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Her arms were crossed over her chest, fingers digging into her own skin as she tried to maintain her composure. Sawyer leaned against a pallet of water bottles, the swelling on the side of his head beginning to subside. "It looks like our only option is to wait." "Wait for what, though?" Madison pressed, frustration evident in her tone. The question hung in the air, giving voice to what they all were thinking. "I don't know, someone to come rescue us," Sawyer offered with a half-hearted shrug. The uncertainty in his voice betrayed his lack of conviction in his own suggestion. "I don't want to dash your hopes there, bro, but I don't think anybody is coming," Dawson replied. Gale walked back from the bay door, her shoulders tense. Was it that bad out there? "Yeah, Gale, it was," Dawson confirmed, rubbing his face with his palm as if trying to erase the mental images. Cars wrecked all over the place, those people swarming around it, and that was just our parking lot. I didn't get a great look at the highway, but it looked just as bad, if not worse. Gale let out a sigh, tossing the metal hook down in disgust, the clattering against the concrete floor drowning out all conversation for a moment. The sound reverberated through the storeroom, a physical manifestation of their collective frustration. "Well, there's got to be something that we can do," Ramona exclaimed, her voice carrying a desperate edge. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a restless energy that demanded action rather than acceptance. Ramona looked over to Finley, who was deep in thought. His brow was furrowed and his gaze was focused on nothing in particular, the wheels clearly turning in his mind. She caught onto it immediately, sensing he might have something to contribute. "Finley, what are you thinking?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice. "I'm thinking we stay right where we are," Finley replied after a moment's hesitation. Ramona's head dropped in disappointment by the answer, which he saw before grabbing her hand and giving it a firm squeeze. His touch was reassuring, a physical connection that conveyed more than words. "I don't mean right here in the storeroom, just that we stay here in the store," he clarified, his voice gaining confidence as he elaborated on his idea. Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I'm not sure if you were paying attention or not, but the front doors are wide open and those people are everywhere." "Then we just have to go close the front doors. There's a metal shutter, right?" Finley asked, his gaze shifting to Gale. Gale thought for a moment before nodding, realization dawning on her face. "Yeah, but I don't know how we get to it." "We fight our way to it," Finley stated simply, as if suggesting they restock the cereal aisle. "That's going to be dangerous," Sawyer cautioned, pushing himself off the pallet to stand upright. His injury may have been improving, but he still moved with careful deliberation. "Not as dangerous if we just sit here and do nothing. I mean, look around. Yeah, we have food, but sooner or later there might be enough of those people to push through the door," Finley argued, his voice rising with urgency. Finley pointed to the swinging door that had a couple of boxes piled up against it. The creatures on the other side continued banging against it, the impacts forceful enough to move the boxes ever so slightly. Each thud was a reminder that their barricade was temporary at best. Not to mention, there's not a bathroom back here, Finley added, raising an eyebrow pointedly. Everybody exchanged worried looks, contemplating an entirely different nightmare than the one trying to break in. Okay, so we're gonna fight, but how do we do that? We only have a crowbar, Dawson pointed out. Finley looked around, hoping for inspiration to strike him. The storeroom was filled with merchandise, but nothing that would serve as effective weapons against the creatures outside. Ramona jumped in before he could speak, her eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. "What about the deep-sea fishing store?" she suggested, straightening her posture with excitement. "You mean the store that's at the other end of the strip mall?" Madison asked skeptically, clearly not thrilled with the idea of venturing that far from their current shelter. "Yeah, they close early during the off-season. I go fishing with my uncle all the time, so I've been in there a lot," Ramona explained, her voice gaining confidence. "They don't sell guns, but they have spear guns, fishing spears, and a lot of stuff we can use as weapons." Finley looked over to Dawson, wanting his input on the idea. If they were going to attempt something this risky, they needed the buy-in of the strongest person among them. "We could definitely use a lot of that stuff and probably have a decent chance at clearing the store," Dawson acknowledged, considering the proposition. "But how the hell do we get there?" Inspiration hit Finley as he walked over to one of the bay doors where the truck was parked. The trailer was flush with the wall, no daylight visible between the vehicle and the building. He opened up the door beside it, away from where the zombies were clustered. "What in the hell are you doing?" Madison demanded, her voice rising with alarm. "Just trust me," Finley assured her, his focus unwavering as he carefully raised the door just enough to see outside. Finley opened it up just enough so that he could see the truck and how high the building went. He studied the angles, measuring distances with his eyes, mentally calculating possibilities. Once he got a good look, he popped up and shut the door, a growing excitement evident in his movements. "That's how we're doing it. We're going over the top," he announced, turning back to face the group with newfound energy. "Over the top? What in the hell are you talking about?" Madison asked, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "The top of the truck is only about 10 feet below the roof. We just need to get up on top of the truck, hop up, and walk across the roof to the store," Finley explained, gesturing with his hands to illustrate the path. "And then what? How are you getting in?" Sawyer questioned, crossing his arms over his chest skeptically. Finley shrugged, unwilling to let practical details dampen his enthusiasm. "There's got to be a hatch up top, maintenance, air conditioning, something, right?" Everybody looked over to Gail, who shook her head with visible frustration. "How the hell would I know?" "You're the manager, aren't you?" Madison pressed, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, I'm the night shift manager, not the damn architect of the building," Gail shot back, her patience clearly wearing thin with the stress of their situation. "So what happens if we get over there and there's no hatch?" Sawyer asked, voicing the obvious flaw in the plan. "Then we go to Plan C," Finley replied with more confidence than he felt. Sawyer wasn't impressed with the answer, his skepticism written plainly across his features. This angered Ramona, who had really taken a shine to Finley ever since he risked his life to save hers. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Well, do you have a better idea, Sawyer, Madison, anybody?" Ramona challenged, looking from face to face. Ramona stared down everyone, the silence that followed speaking volumes. Nobody offered up another idea, their collective creativity seemingly exhausted by the circumstances. "Okay then let's start figuring out how to pull this off," she concluded, her voice softening slightly as she turned back to Finley. Finley looked over to Ramona, who gave him a wink that warmed his heart. That small gesture of support ignited something within him, and he visibly perked up, confidence pouring through him like a physical change. "The toughest part is going to be getting onto the top of the truck, but I have an idea," he said, straightening his posture as he began to formulate the details of his plan. "Call it out then, man," Dawson encouraged, stepping closer with renewed interest. "Dawson, you and I will wait by the door on the other side of the far truck while Gail opens up the bay door where those people are," Finley began, his voice steady as he outlined his strategy. "Make noise, do whatever you have to do to keep them interested. While you do that, we slip out, get to the front of the truck and climb up top." It was a simple plan, but given their limited options, it had merit. Dawson nodded, giving him a thumbs up, his earlier skepticism transforming into cautious support. "That's as solid a plan as I've heard all day, let's do it," Dawson agreed, already moving toward the far bay door. The group quickly divided tasks, each person understanding their role without needing further explanation. Dawson and Finley moved to the far end of the storeroom, Finley gripping his crowbar tightly. Meanwhile, Gale readied herself by the bay door where the zombies had gathered. Once everybody was in position, Finley gave the manager the signal with a quick nod. Gale pulled the bay door open, revealing that the zombie mob had grown to 6, the others being drawn to the sound of the banging and moaning. The creatures immediately began reaching toward the opening, their bloodied hands grasping at empty air, their vacant eyes fixed on the potential prey now visible. "Yay, we're right here, come and get us," Gale shouted, waving her arms to attract their attention. Sawyer, Madison, and Ramona joined in, creating a cacophony designed to focus the creature's attention solely on them. Gale and the others continued making noise as Dawson quietly pulled the other bay door open, just high enough for the two of them to slide out onto the parking lot. Finley's heart pounded in his chest as he followed Dawson under the partially raised door, the cool night air hitting his face as they emerged outside. Their feet touched down on the asphalt, both moving quickly but quietly, while using the truck for cover to stay out of sight of the zombies. The duo made it to the front of the truck, looking down towards where the zombies were, the other tractor-trailer blocking their view. They paused, listening intently, but the creatures seemed fully occupied with the distraction their friends were providing. Dawson motioned for Finley to start climbing up the front part of the truck, before following suit. Finley got up to the door, looking inside to see it empty, the keys sitting on the dash. For a brief moment, he considered whether they could use the truck itself as a weapon or escape vehicle. But he put that thought out of his mind, climbing onto the hood, moving over to give room for Dawson to join him. Once they were both up, they continued moving, getting to the top of the truck cabin before climbing onto the top of the trailer portion. The metal surface was cool beneath their hands, and it took them a moment to gain secure footing on the smooth surface. They looked over towards the open bay door, just high enough to spot Madison in the corner. Finley waved his arms, finally getting her attention. A few seconds later, the bay door closed, the distraction no longer necessary. "Come on, let's get up to the roof," Dawson urged, already moving toward the edge of the trailer where it met the building. Dawson moved over to the wall, getting in a crouching position, Finley moving like they had done this 1,000 times. It was an instinctive teamwork, born of necessity rather than practice. Finley placed his foot into his friend's hands, being boosted up toward the edge of the roof. It took a moment of scrambling, his fingers searching for purchase on the rough surface, but he finally pulled himself up with a grunt of effort. Dawson needed no help, running along the top of the trailer, leaping up and grabbing onto the ledge. His athletic build and natural strength made the maneuver look easy as he pulled himself up with efficient movements. He rolled onto the roof, breathing heavily but with an exhilarated smile on his face. "Are you good?" Finley asked, extending a hand to help Dawson to his feet. "I'm good. Let's check the front, see how things look," Dawson replied, dusting off his hands on his jeans. The two teenagers walked confidently toward the front of the store, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel-covered roof. They moved cautiously as they approached the edge, wary of making themselves visible to the creatures below. They paused when they got within 5 yards of the edge, crouching down to peer over the side. The full scene came into view, and it was worse than either of them had imagined. The parking lot was just as chaotic as the little snippet of it they had seen earlier, zombies running around everywhere in seemingly random patterns. Some clustered around abandoned vehicles, while others wandered aimlessly, occasionally breaking into sprints when they detected movement. The highway wasn't any better. Zombies running wild in the streets, chasing after cars that were racing around. Several wrecked vehicles dotted the road, some still smoking from recent crashes. In the distance, they could see flashing lights, but whether they belonged to emergency vehicles or just abandoned cars with hazard lights activated, they couldn't tell. "Yeah, there's definitely nobody coming to save us," Finley observed. Dawson stood up, a determined set to his jaw as he surveyed the apocalyptic scene before them. "Well, we better save ourselves then. Come on." Chapter 7. Dawson and Finley walked across the entire length of the strip mall, which ran about 100 yards. The rocky gravel top crunched under their feet as they went, occasionally stepping over lines for the air conditioning units. The night air was cool against their faces, a welcome relief after the stuffiness of the storeroom. "You think this is going to work?" Dawson asked, breaking the silence as they moved forward. Finley shrugged, careful to maintain his balance on the slightly uneven surface. "It has to. I don't see a lot of other options right now." When they reached the other side, they began looking for a hatch, any access point that would allow them entry into the fishing supply store below. They scanned the rooftop systematically, checking every protrusion and panel for something that might serve their purpose. "I think I got it," Dawson called out, spotting something promising near the edge of the building. Finley jogged over to join Dawson at the hatch, watching as his friend grasped the metal handle. Dawson turned it with some effort, the mechanism stiff from disuse, and yanked it up. The hatch opened with a metallic groan, revealing a 2-foot-deep hole filled with a few pipes and nozzles, clearly part of the building's plumbing or fire suppression system. They stared at it for a moment, disappointment settling over them like a heavy blanket. "You know, I'm not an architect or anything, but I don't think this leads down into the store," Dawson said, unable to keep the frustration from his voice. "Damn it," Finley muttered, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. The plan had seemed so promising in theory, but reality was proving more complicated. Dawson straightened up, brushing gravel from his knees. "You've been the idea man tonight, so if you got another one dancing around in that head of yours, this would be a great time for it." Finley let out a frustrated grunt as he walked towards the front of the building. The pressure of being the idea man was starting to weigh on him. He stopped at the edge, looking down at the parking lot, staring at it for longer than normal time. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene below, mind working through possibilities. While there were several cars in the lot in front of the grocery store, there weren't any in front of the fishing store. The asphalt gleamed emptily under the security lights, not a creature in sight near this end of the building. This observation sparked something in Finley's mind, a realization that perhaps their approach had been wrong from the start. Finley moved quickly to the side of the store, looking down at the driveway, which was completely empty as well. He moved with purpose towards the back of the store, getting the attention of Dawson. "Talk to me, Finley," Dawson called, following behind with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Hang on," Finley replied, his mind too focused on the developing plan to explain just yet. The teenager kept walking to the back, his pace quickening as he approached the rear edge of the building. Looking down, he spotted a ladder at the back corner that went down to the ground. The last few feet of rungs were covered by a metal grate, designed to prevent people from climbing up, but it would be easy for them to get to the ground from their position. "I know what we're doing," Finley announced, a new confidence in his voice. Dawson walked to the edge, spotting the ladder and immediately shaking his head no. His expression made it clear he thought the idea was too risky. "Not if it involves climbing down that ladder," he objected, crossing his arms over his chest. "Trust me, all of those people are by the grocery store. None of them are down here, not in the front, not at the sides," Finley argued, gesturing toward the empty parking areas below. Dawson let out a sigh, realizing it's a viable plan even if he didn't want it to be. He looked over the edge again, still shaking his head. The drop was considerable and the ladder didn't inspire confidence, but their options were limited. "Okay, say we get down there. Then what? The store's locked up tight," Dawson pointed out. "It's a good thing I brought the keys then," Finley replied with unexpected wit. Finley held up his crowbar, prompting a smirk on Dawson's face. The metal gleamed dully in the moonlight, a crude but effective solution to their problem. "When did you become such a wild man?" Dawson asked, genuine surprise in his tone. The quiet, unassuming Finley he'd known for months seemed to have been replaced by someone bolder, more decisive. "Something about the end of the world that just brings it out in me, I guess. So, are you game?" Finley responded with a shrug, though there was a hint of pride in his voice at Dawson's implied compliment. "As long as you let me have the crowbar, I think I have a better chance at opening that door than you do," Dawson countered, flexing his considerably more muscular arm. Finley nodded in agreement, tossing it over to his friend. The metal bar arced through the air, landing solidly in Dawson's outstretched hand. "Let's do it then. I don't want to have time to realize how dumb this is," Dawson said, moving toward the ladder with newfound determination. The two of them exchanged a fist bump before embarking. Dawson led the two of them down the ladder to the ground. The metal rungs were cold against their palms as they descended, both of them grasping them tightly, fearful of a slip. Dawson jumped down first from the last accessible rung, landing with a soft thud on the asphalt below. He raised his arms to help the smaller Finley navigate the final few feet drop. Finley hesitated briefly before letting himself fall, Dawson's strong hands catching him and steadying him as he landed. They tensed up as they looked around, expecting a zombie to emerge from the shadows. The back alley was quiet, too quiet almost, with only the distant sounds of chaos from the front of the strip mall breaking the silence. Fortunately, no creatures appeared from the darkness. They had a moment to breathe, to gather themselves for the next phase of their risky plan. Dawson nodded his head to the side, getting Finley to head over to the back door of the business. They approached cautiously, Dawson examining the heavy metal door with a critical eye. He immediately shook his head when he realized it was an emergency release door, something very difficult to break into from the outside. "Front," Dawson whispered just loud enough for Finley to hear before leading them to the side of the building. They reached the front of the building, Dawson peeking out, looking down the sidewalk towards the grocery store at the far end of the building. He spotted a couple dozen zombies running around, none of them noticing them yet. The creatures moved with varying speeds, some shambling aimlessly while others darted about with frightening purpose. "I'm going to rip that door open. When we get inside, you start loading up anything useful while I barricade the door," Dawson instructed, gripping the crowbar tightly. Finley gave his friend a thumbs up, understanding the urgency of their mission. Dawson took a deep breath before leading them around the corner. He rushed up to the front door, jamming the edge of the crowbar into the locking mechanism. The metal scraped against metal as he worked to create leverage. Dawson put his full weight behind the bar, groaning as he strained against the lock. His muscles tensed with the effort, veins standing out on his forearms as he applied maximum force. While he was succeeding in prying the door open, the noise drew the attention of zombies from the far end of the building. Heads turned in their direction, and several of the creatures began moving toward them. "They've spotted us," Finley warned, his voice tight with tension as he kept watch. "I'm working on it," Dawson replied through gritted teeth, redoubling his efforts on the stubborn door. Dawson continued straining against the door as Finley kept watch, his fear rising as the zombies got closer and closer. The creatures had broken into a run now, moving with alarming speed down the sidewalk toward their position. 15 seconds, Finley counted down, gauging the distance and speed of the approaching threat. "I'm working on it," Dawson repeated, frustration evident in his strained voice. The creatures got closer, their moans becoming audible now as they closed the gap. What had seemed like a reasonable risk minutes ago was rapidly becoming a potential death sentence. 10 seconds, Finley updated, his voice rising in pitch as panic began to set in. "Not helping," Dawson grunted, the lock beginning to give way under his continued assault. The creatures got closer still, close enough now that Finley could make out individual features. The vacant eyes, the bloodied mouths, the torn clothing. They were maybe 30 yards away and closing fast. "We have to go," Finley urged, ready to abandon the attempt and run for safety. Just as he was about to pull on Dawson's arm, the lock gave way with a sudden crack. "I'm in," Dawson shouted triumphantly. The door finally broke free of the lock, swinging open to reveal the darkened interior of the fishing store. Dawson grabbed Finley by the shirt, throwing him through the door before rushing through himself. The sudden movement nearly knocked Finley off his feet, but the adrenaline coursing through his system kept him upright. Dawson threw the door shut, immediately grabbing onto a metal rack that was sitting beside the door, pulling it down. The display crashed to the ground, landing in front of the door just as the zombies arrived. Fishing lures, reels, and other equipment scattered across the floor as the rack became an improvised barricade. While it wasn't the heaviest thing, it managed to hold the door shut against the initial assault. The creatures pounded on the glass door, their faces pressed against it, in a grotesque display of hunger. "Get things together, because this isn't going to hold long," Dawson ordered, his breathing heavy from exertion. "I'm on it," Finley replied, already moving deeper into the store. Finley rushed through the store, his eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lighting that cast everything in an eerie glow. He immediately spotted a display of spear guns on the wall. The weapons were designed for underwater hunting but would serve their purpose well enough against the creatures outside. He grabbed a large canvas bag from behind the counter, throwing as many of the spear guns into it as possible. While he packed, Dawson grabbed another heavy display rack, throwing it on top of the other one, adding a little more weight to the rapidly failing barricade. The added mass bought them a few more precious seconds, but the glass of the door was beginning to crack under the relentless pressure. Dawson then put his foot against the base of the makeshift barrier, bracing himself, hoping to buy them a little more time. A tense couple of minutes passed, the only sounds being the constant pounding on the door and Finley's hurried movements as he gathered supplies. Finally, Finley yelled out from the back of the store, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "I got more than we can carry, let's move." Dawson rushed to the back, where Finley had a stack of long fishing spears laid out on the counter. He had 2 canvas bags slung over his shoulder, which almost looked bigger than he was. The bags bulged with their newly acquired arsenal: spear guns, fishing knives, and other improvised weapons that might give them a fighting chance. "Get the spears and let's go," Finley instructed, already moving toward the store's back exit. Dawson could see Finley was struggling with the weight of the bags, but he didn't question the order, only followed it. He grabbed the handful of fishing spears off the counter, each one about 8 feet long, metal with a pointed tip on the end. They were unwieldy, but would provide the reach they needed to engage the creatures from a safer distance. Finley led them to the back room, both of them hearing their makeshift barricade giving way at the front of the store. The sounds of breaking glass and metal scraping against tile told them their time had run out. The teenager plowed through the back door, throwing it open before turning towards the grocery store. Dawson was quick to follow, slamming the door shut after he exited, hoping it would be enough to slow the creatures inside. The 2 men raced down the parking lot, their footfalls echoing in the night air. The weight of their acquired weapons made running difficult, but fear provided additional motivation. When they got halfway back to the store, 2 creatures emerged from the front of the tractor trailers by the grocery store, locking onto them. "I got 'em," Dawson called out, not breaking stride. As they ran, Dawson pulled one of the spears out from under his arm, nearly falling over in the process, but managing to get it into his free hand. He raced ahead of Finley, aiming it right at the lead creature that was closing quickly. His football training kicked in, the hours of practice translating into unexpected skill with the improvised weapon. The tip of the spear landed firmly in the zombie's chest, punching right through it and embedding in the closely following zombie. The impact was jarring, the spear penetrating with more ease than Dawson had expected. Dawson stepped to the side before jumping back towards the lead creature, hitting it off balance with his shoulder. The creature tumbled to the ground, dragging the connected zombie with it, buying them enough time to get past them. The spear remained lodged in the fallen creatures, but Dawson didn't waste time trying to retrieve it. They had plenty more. Open up! Open up!" Dawson shouted, his voice carrying across the parking lot to the grocery store. Dawson barely got the words out before Gail opened up the closest bay door. She must have been watching for them, anticipating their return. Both men raced towards it, Dawson reaching it first, throwing the remaining spears inside before jumping up with athletic grace. Finley could hear the zombies from the far side of the store running for him, their moans growing louder as they closed the distance. He knew he didn't have time for a careful approach. He was weighed down so much by the canvas bags that he couldn't jump, so he did the only thing he could. Raise his arms up. Pull me up, he called out. Sawyer and Dawson reached down, each grabbing a hand and yanking him into the store. The canvas bags scraped against the edge of the bay as he was hauled upward, but they held. All 3 teenagers fell backwards to the floor once Finley cleared the threshold, landing in a heap of limbs and newly acquired weapons. Gail reached up, grabbing the bay door and pulling it down as the zombies came around the front of the truck. They moaned in excitement, racing towards them, but couldn't reach the bay before the door slammed shut with a resounding clang. Everybody collapsed onto the concrete floor of the storeroom, breathing heavily, the sounds of zombie hands against the door filling the space. No one spoke for several moments, each person processing the close call in their own way. After several moments of silence, Finley spoke with ragged breaths. All things considered, that went a lot better than I thought it would. Chapter 8. Several minutes had passed, giving Dawson and Finley time to catch their breath. The adrenaline from their daring retrieval mission was beginning to subside, leaving them with shaky limbs but clear heads. Once they were good, they started unpacking the goods from the bags they brought over. The canvas bags yielded an impressive arsenal of fishing equipment that could be repurposed as weapons. Spear guns, fishing knives, and other implements were laid out on the concrete floor, creating a small arsenal that gave the group their first real sense of hope since the nightmare began. "Let me guess, there was a sale on spear guns?" Gale asked, eyeing the collection with a mixture of amusement and relief. "Oddly enough, there was. 30% off, although I had my 5-finger discount," Finley replied, waving his hand in the air with unexpected humor. The joke elicited a laugh from the others, the tension that had been building all night finding momentary release in the shared moment of levity. Ramona's laughter was particularly enthusiastic, her eyes rarely leaving Finley as they continued unpacking the supplies. As they continued sorting through their bounty, revealing a handful of knives as well, Dawson picked up one of the spears, walking over to the door where the zombies were still banging against it. The metal fishing spear was about 8 feet long, sturdy enough to penetrate flesh but light enough to wield effectively. The group watched as he grabbed the boxes that were against it, pulling them 6 inches away from the door. Madison's eyes widened in alarm at this apparent breach of their security. "Dawson, what the hell are you doing?" she demanded, taking a step back from the door instinctively. "Relax, Madison, I only need a few inches," Dawson assured her. Madison got a smirk on her face, as if she was going to say something inappropriate, but stopped herself as soon as Dawson caught on, causing both of them to laugh for a moment. Dawson turned his attention back to the door, which was now pushed in by about 8 inches, just wide enough to reveal a zombie face pressing against it. The creature's vacant eyes stared through the gap, its teeth gnashing mindlessly as it tried to reach the fresh prey it sensed beyond the barrier. Dawson lined up his shot with the fishing spear, aiming carefully at the creature's forehead before shoving it forward with a powerful thrust. The tip cracked through the skull with ease, sending the zombie collapsing to the ground, only to be replaced a couple seconds later by another one. Dark liquid splashed against the door as the first zombie fell, leaving a macabre smear as a testament to Dawson's accuracy. "I'll clear out the company by the door if the rest of you want to figure out what we're doing," Dawson offered, already lining up his next shot. Dawson delivered another head strike, ending the unlife of a zombified customer. The spear made a sickening sound as it penetrated bone, but Dawson's expression remained focused and determined, betraying no hesitation or disgust at the grim task. "What do we need to be able to close the shutter door?" Ramona asked, turning away from the carnage to focus on their next objective. "My key unlocks the cover for the chain. We just need to open it up and start pulling on it," Gale explained, patting her pocket where the store keys resided. "And where is that?" Ramona pressed. "Right beside the door," Gale replied. "Oh, good. So not dangerous at all," Madison interjected, her sarcasm masking genuine fear. "We can handle it. We have everything we need right here," Finley assured them, brandishing a spear gun with a newfound confidence. "Finley's right. We can do this," Sawyer added, his voice still slightly unsteady from his head injury but carrying conviction nonetheless. Finley gave his coworker a thankful nod, appreciative of the backup. The solidarity between the formerly disparate group of employees was growing stronger with each challenge they faced together. "So, how do we do it, though? Even if we can get up to the chain, those things are right outside the door," Madison questioned. "For the shopping carts, we use the shopping carts," Finley suggested after a moment of contemplation, the idea forming as he spoke it. "How?" Madison asked, unable to follow his reasoning. Sawyer got a smirk on his face, connecting the dots that Finley was making. His eyes lit up with understanding as the plan took shape in his mind. "You're a genius," he said to Finley. "The carts are right beside the front entrance. We just have to come up on the produce side and push. There's 30, 40 carts already there." "Exactly. They'll go right in front of the door and block it off while the shutter comes down," Finley elaborated, his hands gesturing to illustrate the movement of the carts across the entrance. "But won't they get in the way of the shutter?" Ramona asked, identifying a potential flaw in the plan. Initially they will, but once it's down to the top of the carts, we can slide them back a couple inches so it can shut, Finley explained. Ramona smiled, grabbing Finley's hand again, giving it a tight squeeze. Finley returned the pressure, drawing strength from the connection. The biggest issue is going to be getting up to the front of the store. There's no telling how many of those people are in the store, Sawyer pointed out. The group turned over to Dawson as he let out a satisfied grunt after delivering another strike to a zombie's head. The spear made a wet sound as he withdrew it from the creature's skull, dark blood dripping from the tip onto the concrete floor. He turned around once he noticed nobody was talking, the sudden silence drawing his attention. "I've got 5 down so far, so that's a start at least," he reported, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. "We need to pull as many of them to the back of the store as we can," Gale suggested. "Won't that just pull more of them into the store?" Madison countered, concerned about making their situation worse. "Not if we keep the noise to a minimum, just loud enough to get them moving this way, but not loud enough to carry outside," Sawyer replied, his voice gaining strength as his mind cleared further from his earlier injury. "And then what?" Ramona prompted, her expression intent as she followed the evolving plan. Sawyer thought for a moment before shrugging and looking over to Finley, who had become the idea man for the group. "3 of us slip out the door once Dawson takes out the ones that keep coming up. We stick to the outer aisles, hoping that the noise we've made so far has pulled them to the middle of the store," Finley began, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finley stopped for a moment, pacing back and forth as he continued to think, stopping and starting a couple of times before finally speaking up. His movements were deliberate as he walked the length of the storeroom, each step seeming to crystallize another aspect of the plan in his mind. Dawson goes left, cuts up to the produce section so he can push the carts into place. Gale and I will go the other way around, ready to run to the shutter door release when the time's right, he continued, the plan taking final shape as he spoke. "Why are you going with Gale?" Sawyer asked. "Because she's going to need someone to protect her while she closes the shutter," Finley explained patiently. "Why don't I go then?" Sawyer pressed, straightening his posture as if to demonstrate his readiness. "Because you need to stay back here to help Madison and Ramona with the crowd you're going to draw when you start making noise," Finley countered, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't think Ramona and I can handle it ourselves," Madison interjected, her pride clearly wounded by the implication. Finley let out a bit of a sigh before turning to Madison, speaking in a bit of an annoyed tone that surprised even himself. The constant questioning was wearing on his already frayed nerves. "Yes, Madison, I have no doubt that you and Ramona can handle it on your own. However, I was trying to do my friend Sawyer a favor and give him an important job to do, rather than tell him that he needs to sit this one out because it's clear he has a concussion and doesn't need to be running around being chased by crazed cannibals," Finley explained, his words coming in a rush. Madison shrunk down a bit at the verbal assault Finley unleashed. While he never yelled, his words were more than enough to get her to shut up about unimportant things. After a few seconds of uncomfortable silence, Sawyer spoke up, his natural good humor coming to the rescue. "I mean, you could have told me that I get to hang out alone with a couple of hot chicks, and that would have worked too," he suggested with a playful grin. Everybody stared at Sawyer for a moment before the group broke into laughter, appreciating the much-needed tension break. "I'll keep that in mind for next time," Finley replied with a smile, grateful for Sawyer's ability to diffuse the situation. Dawson grunted from the other side of the room, pulling everyone's attention. He stood there for a few moments, using the tip of the bloodied spear to tap on the metal door a few times, waiting for another zombie to appear. 30 tense seconds went by with no takers, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of moaning from farther within the store. "I think we're clear, at least for anything near the door," Dawson announced, his expression cautiously optimistic. Finley gave him a nod, standing up and taking charge. "Okay, then let's get ready to do this." Chapter 9. Dawson and Sawyer pulled the boxes back from the door, giving the group enough room to open it in their direction and slip out. The heavy containers scraped against the concrete floor as they repositioned them, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. As they pulled, they were prepared to shove the barrier back if creatures stormed them, but it didn't happen. The storeroom remained their sanctuary for a few moments longer. Dawson nodded to Finley, getting him to take point. The silent communication between them had developed over the course of the night, a bond forged in crisis that seemed stronger than their months of casual workplace acquaintance. Finley gripped a knife tightly in one hand and his crowbar in the other as he approached the door, his knuckles white with tension. The weight of the weapons felt reassuring in his palms as he slowly slid out into the unknown. He stayed in the threshold of the door, looking down the back aisle of the store. The scene before him was surreal. The familiar grocery store now transformed into a battleground, with scattered merchandise and dark smears marking the polished floor. He could see straight up to the front of the store, seeing movement by the door. His position was in shadow, making it difficult for any creature up there to see him. Finley poked his head back in, motioning for the others to follow. His gestures were concise and deliberate, minimizing noise while conveying clear instructions. Gale was next, a spear gun in her hand, her grip betraying her nervousness despite her determined expression. Dawson moved up, looking back to the others, speaking low. "You know the plan, count to 60, then raise hell," he instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. Sawyer nodded, giving his brother a fist bump and a concerned look as the older teenager slipped out of the door. This simple gesture carried layers of meaning between the siblings. Be careful, watch your back, come back alive. Once in the back aisle, Dawson gave Gale and Finley a nod before heading to the left, his movements confident but cautious. Finley motioned for Gale to follow as they headed to the right. The two moved silently, each step carefully placed to avoid making noise. Finley kept Gale slightly behind him, positioning himself as the first line of defense should they encounter trouble. Dawson moved quickly along the back aisle, a knife in his hands ready to strike at a moment's notice. He moved past aisle number 4, looking up and spotting 3 zombies milling about, one of them having gotten caught up on a hook, thrashing about and keeping the others enthralled. Dawson continued moving, getting to the final aisle, looking out towards produce. The colorful displays of fruits and vegetables created an incongruous backdrop to the horror unfolding in the store. The normalcy of the arranged apples and oranges seemed to mock their desperate situation. Dawson mumbled curses under his breath when he saw 3 zombies roaming around, just waiting for someone to draw their attention. He scanned the area, spotting a fruit display near the corner of the building. The strategic analysis came naturally to him, his hours on the football field having honed his ability to read a situation and find the best path forward. He stayed low, moving swiftly and sliding to the ground, planting his back against the display. He poked his head up over the top, seeing the creatures were none the wiser to his presence. Dawson stayed low, keeping the mental count in his head that his brother was doing. Once it got to 10 seconds left, he ducked back down, hoping that the creatures took the bait. Right on cue, 10 seconds later, he heard his brother Sawyer yelling from the back of the store, banging on the metal door. The sound reverberated through the empty store, cutting through the eerie silence. Instantly, 2 of the ghouls from produce turned and took off running towards the back of the store. Neither of them so much as looked in his direction, solely focused on the commotion by the storeroom. Their single-minded pursuit of the noise confirmed what Finley had observed earlier. The creatures seemed drawn primarily to sound, with limited capacity for more complex assessment of their surroundings. Dawson poked his head over the display again, spotting 1 zombie near the front of produce, who didn't take the bait. The creature continued its aimless wandering, apparently oblivious to the commotion at the back of the store. Knowing he needed to do something, he grabbed an avocado before moving up closer to the creature. Dawson took a knee behind another display, just a few yards away from the zombie. He tossed the avocado against the nearby shelf, which alerted the creature, who sprinted towards it, looking around frantically at what caused the sound. With the zombies back to him, Dawson stood up, rushing forward and driving the knife into the base of the creature's skull. The blade sank in with surprising ease, encountering less resistance than he had expected. He grabbed onto the zombie's waist, lowering it to the ground to prevent it from making a racket as it collapsed. With the coast clear to the front of the store, Dawson moved fast, sliding down behind the row of carts. The metal shopping carts stood in neat rows, awaiting customers who would never come. He poked his head up, spotting half a dozen zombies milling about the entrance, none of them taking the bait at the back of the store. They shuffled aimlessly, occasionally bumping into one another without reaction. Dawson looked across the store, spotting Finley and Gale ducking behind one of the aisles. Finley was giving him a series of hand signals that didn't make any sense to him, except for the last one, that he took to mean, "What do you think?" Dawson thought for a moment, trusting Finley's instincts, giving him a thumbs up, thinking to himself, "I hope you know what you're doing." The night had taught him to respect the quiet bagger's judgment, despite their vastly different positions in the high school social hierarchy. 10 seconds later, he looked back over to Finley as he grabbed a can off the shelf and threw it over the shelves. The can soared through the air, getting halfway across the store before clattering against the metal. The sound was loud, getting the attention of every zombie by the door, along with a few just outside it. All 9 of them sprinted towards the aisle where it landed, vanishing behind it like a pack of predators chasing prey. Their single-minded pursuit left the entrance momentarily clear. Dawson saw Finley and Gale running out from cover, spurring him into motion. The opportunity they had created wouldn't last long. "Damn it, I gotta move," Dawson muttered, galvanizing himself into action. Dawson put his shoulder into the carts closest to the wall, pushing with everything he had. His powerful, football-trained muscles strained as he drove his weight into the mass of metal. It took a moment to get them rolling, but once they did, they moved with ease over the floor, wheels clattering across the tile. Dawson kept pushing until he felt resistance coming from the other side, looking up to see Finley stopping them, successfully blocking off the entrance. The noise, however, drew the attention of several zombies, who ran back at them from the aisle, their momentary distraction already forgotten. Dawson stared them down, ready to fight whoever came his way, when a spear suddenly flew through the air. The pointed tip embedded in the eye socket of a creature, sending it staggering to the ground. Dawson glanced over, seeing Finley tossing the spear gun to the side before getting his crowbar and knife ready. "Here goes nothing," Dawson said, bracing himself for the fight. Dawson darted forward, meeting the first zombie racing towards him after a few steps. Rather than strike with his blade, he shoved the creature back into the others, sending it off balance and knocking a couple of them to the ground. The impact created a momentary advantage, buying him precious seconds to prepare for his next move. Dawson grabbed the next ghoul by the neck, ignoring its flailing hands as he drove his knife into the side of its head. The blade sank in with a sickening crunch, dark liquid spraying from the wound as he withdrew it. Rather than let it drop, he threw it back into the others, buying him a few precious seconds. Dawson glanced over to the left, checking on Finley, who was holding his own. The smaller teenager swung his crowbar in a controlled manner, cracking a zombie in the head, dropping it instantly. The metal bar connected with a hollow thud, caving in the creature's skull with startling efficiency. Another zombie tried to race by him to get to Gale, only to have Finley use the curved end of the makeshift weapon to hook into the zombie's shoulder. The sudden pulling sent the zombie off its feet, falling to the ground hard. Finley didn't hesitate, driving the knife into its forehead with a quick, efficient thrust. His movements were fluid and purposeful, as if he'd been fighting for his life for years rather than hours. Dawson turned back to his own zombie mess, 3 creatures trying to get off the ground but getting tangled up with one another. He darted forward, stabbing one zombie in the head, ending its threat with a single decisive blow. The other 2 were nearly back to their feet, so he jumped onto their backs, 1 foot on each. His substantial weight was enough to pin them to the ground, making them easy targets for his blade. The knife made a wet sound as it penetrated each skull in turn, their struggles ceasing immediately as the blade found its mark. With the threats at the front of the store taken care of, Dawson and Finley rushed over to the front door, where several zombies were pushing against the shopping carts, their arms getting caught between them and the shutter. "The shutter is on the cart, I can't get it any further," Gale called out, frustration evident in her voice as she continued to pull at the chain. "Finley, help me pull. Gale, you be ready to yank that chain," Dawson instructed, already moving toward the barricade of carts. "I'm ready," Gale confirmed. Finley rushed over, both teenagers grabbing onto the carts and pulling them slightly back, just a few inches. The movement was enough to allow Gale to pull the shutter down all the way. The 3 of them breathed a sigh of relief as it smacked to the ground, the metallic clang resonating throughout the store. "We gotta check on the others," Dawson said, already turning back toward the storeroom where they'd left Sawyer, Madison, and Ramona. "I'll get to the office," Gail said, her manager's instincts kicking in as she thought about accessing the store's security systems. Gail ran off as Dawson and Finley got their weapons ready, walking down the center aisle towards the door. Their footsteps echoed in the now quiet store, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows as they moved cautiously forward. It was hard to see clearly from a distance, but they were cautiously optimistic when they didn't see any movement near the storeroom entrance. "Sawyer, are you good?" Dawson called out, tension evident in his voice. The duo waited with bated breath for a response, which came several seconds later when the door pushed open a few inches. The slight movement sent a jolt of anticipation through them, relief flooding in as they saw the familiar face of Sawyer peering through the gap. "We're good in here," Sawyer confirmed, his voice carrying a note of weary triumph. Dawson and Finley let out a sigh of relief as Gail's voice carried over the loudspeaker, the store's PA system crackling to life. Her voice echoed through the now quiet space, bouncing off the high ceiling and empty aisles. "I can see the entire store on the monitors. We're the only things moving in here," she announced, the security cameras giving her a complete view of their newly secured fortress. "Oh, thank God. I'm pretty sure I pulled every muscle in my body just now," Finley said, the adrenaline that had been keeping him going beginning to subside, leaving him acutely aware of every ache and strain. "That was some fine work with that crowbar. I think we found your new best friend," Dawson said, clapping Finley on the shoulder with a grin that bordered on giddy relief. The two of them looked to the back, where Sawyer pulled the door open wider. He stepped over the fallen zombies, his movement still slightly unsteady from his earlier injury, but his face alight with relief and pride. Behind him, Madison emerged cautiously, her usual bravado tempered by the night's events. Ramona climbed over the corpses, laying eyes on Finley. As soon as she spotted him, she raced over to him, throwing her arms around him in a fierce embrace. Her body trembled slightly against his, whether from fear or relief or both, he couldn't tell. What mattered was that she was safe. They were all safe, at least for now. "Well, second best friend at any rate," Dawson commented with a knowing smirk, watching the reunion. Both Dawson and Finley broke into laughter, relieved and a little surprised that they had survived the ordeal. Chapter 10. The next evening, Finley and Ramona sat up in the office, looking out through the small window towards the highway. There wasn't much to look at on the ground, just wrecked cars and zombies running around. The sky, however, was bathed in beautiful red and orange hues as the sun began to set. The day had passed in a blur of activity, securing the store, taking inventory of supplies, and establishing a makeshift living space in the break room. They had worked with focused purpose, determined to make their unexpected fortress as comfortable and safe as possible. Now, with the immediate task completed, they could finally pause and process the new reality that had come crashing into their lives. The two of them sat quietly, shoulders almost touching, both lost in their own thoughts as they watched the spectacular sunset. Finley reached his hand over, grabbing hers tightly. She not only reciprocated but leaned into him, pulling his arm over her shoulder. Finley didn't know if this would have happened if the world wasn't ending, but deep in his heart, he really didn't care, because it was happening right now. The silence between them wasn't awkward but comfortable. Two people finding solace in each other's presence amid the apocalypse. The reflection of the sunset painted Ramona's face in warm, golden tones, highlighting the curve of her cheek and the slight upturn of her lips, as she glanced at him briefly before returning her gaze to the window. Their moment lasted for several more minutes before Madison poked her head inside the office. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she'd changed into a t-shirt from the store's clothing section, a souvenir shirt that read Outer Banks across the front. "Hey y'all, Dawson's grilling up some steaks if you want to come on down," she announced. She looked up, seeing that Finley had his arm around Ramona, letting out a sigh that was part exasperation, part amusement. Her eyes rolled dramatically as she leaned against the doorframe. "Oh, good Lord, will you just kiss her already?" Madison exclaimed, throwing her hands up in theatrical frustration. Finley looked down to Ramona, their eyes locking. A silent question passed between them, answered by the softening of her expression. She gave him a smile and a wink, prompting him to lean in for a kiss. It was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Ramona responded with enthusiasm. They continued it until they heard Madison let out an exasperated gasp before shutting the door with more force than necessary. The young couple broke into laughter after she left, the tension of the moment releasing in a shared expression of joy. "I wonder if she knew I made the first move on you last night," Ramona mused, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Thanks for that, by the way. I'm a little..." Finley trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence without sounding pathetic, but Ramona jumped right in, saving him from his own awkwardness. "A little awkward, shy," she offered, her tone teasing but kind. "I would have gone with adorably awkward, but that's the general idea," Finley conceded, with a self-deprecating smile. "Well, I figured after you risked your life for me, I could help you out a bit," Ramona replied, her light-hearted tone briefly giving way to something more sincere. They both smiled, engaging in another small kiss before looking out at the sunset, which was fading. The brilliant oranges and reds were giving way to deeper purples as night approached, drawing a curtain on their first day as survivors of whatever catastrophe had befallen the world. "So what do you think? You want to go get a steak?" Finley asked, his stomach responding to the mention of food with a subtle growl. "As long as the store's buying, Lord knows they don't pay us enough to afford steak," Ramona quipped, her sense of humor intact despite everything. Both of them laughed as they walked out of the office, heading towards the produce section. Their fingers intertwined naturally as they walked through the store, navigating past the evidence of their struggles from the previous night. The bodies had been moved outside through the loading dock, a grim task they'd completed that morning, and the floors had been mopped clean of blood. Despite these efforts, the store still bore the marks of battle, toppled displays and scattered merchandise that they hadn't yet had the energy to address. The produce section had been transformed. The displays had all been moved out of the way, and a makeshift picnic area had been set up. Sawyer, Gale, and Madison sat in beach chairs, each of them with a drink in hand. Dawson stood over a charcoal grill, several large cuts of meat sizzling on top. They'd hauled the display model from the outdoor living section into the store, setting it up where the ventilation was best. The scent of cooking meat filled the air, making Finley realize just how hungry he was. "Hey, Romeo, glad you could join us. How do you like your steak cooked?" Dawson called out, a spatula raised in greeting. "Medium rare," Finley replied. "That's the correct answer." Dawson nodded approvingly, turning his attention back to the grill. "I prefer mine medium," Ramona added, a hint of challenge in her voice. Dawson thought about it for a moment before smiling. "Well, you make my boy there all kinds of happy, so I'll accept that as a correct answer too." The young couple walked over to the seats, sitting down as Sawyer pulled out a couple of sodas from the cooler sitting next to him. He held them up, waiting for them to nod that they liked it before tossing them over. The cold cans arced through the air, caught deftly by Finley, who handed one to Ramona. "So, how was the sunset?" Sawyer asked, his speech slightly clearer than the previous night, suggesting his concussion symptoms were improving. "Beautiful as always," Ramona replied, popping the tab on her soda. Finley got a strange look on his face, worrying Ramona. His brow furrowed as he stared intently at nothing in particular, seemingly struck by a sudden realization. "What's wrong, hun?" Ramona asked, her hand finding his arm, concern evident in her voice. "I just realized that I didn't clock out yesterday," Finley said, his face breaking into a grin as he delivered the punchline. Everybody broke into laughter, their spirits as high as they could be given the circumstances. "Finley, were you able to reach your parents? I know you were the last one who hadn't yet," Gale asked when the laughter had subsided. Finley gave her a nod. "About an hour ago. My mom had her phone on silent because she had been hiding. Didn't realize it until she looked and saw 20 missed calls from me." "Good, I'm glad that they're safe," Gale said, genuine warmth in her voice. They're not doing as good as we are. I mean, we're having steak after all, but they're fine for a while," Finley elaborated. "I don't think anybody out there is doing as well as we are. We're not going hungry for a while," Sawyer observed, gesturing around at the fully stocked grocery store. "And thank God we restocked the toilet paper a couple days ago too," Dawson added with perfect comedic timing. Everybody broke into laughter as Dawson pulled the steaks off the grill, throwing them onto plates and carrying a couple over for Finley and Ramona. The meat sizzled enticingly, perfectly seared and with just the right amount of pink showing through. Once they had their meals, the others picked up their plates and started eating. The friendly banter fell away, replaced with chewing and satisfied moans from the perfectly seasoned steaks tingling their taste buds. This went on for several minutes before the moment was broken by the sound of a phone ringing. It wasn't anybody's cell phone, however, it was the main line. The shrill tone cut through their impromptu feast, startling all of them into stillness. Everybody looked at the others with confusion before Dawson broke towards the front of the store at a full sprint. The possibilities of who might be calling, survivors, authorities, rescue, electrified them all into motion. He raced into the office, with everybody else following, grabbing the phone and picking it up. "Hello," Dawson answered, breathless from his sprint. He listened to the person talk for a moment as the others joined him in the office, looking on with confusion and hope. Their faces were tense with anticipation, eyes fixed on Dawson for any clue about who might be on the other end. Hey, hang on a second. I'm going to put you on speakerphone. I got a few others here who are going to want to hear that," Dawson said, his expression giving nothing away. Dawson looked to Gail, who hit the proper button, turning on the speakerphone function. The small speaker crackled to life, filling the cramped office with the sound of faint static. "All right, man, you're on," Dawson announced, stepping back so the others could gather around. "Hey, can you hear me all right?" A male voice came through, slightly distorted but understandable. "We can hear you," Dawson confirmed, leaning towards the phone as if the physical proximity would improve the connection. "Well, hey everybody, I hope you're doing okay this evening. My name is Henry, and I'm calling from Hatteras." "Henry, my name is Gail, and I'm the manager here. Do you know what's going on out there?" Gail asked. "Well, ma'am, I don't know a lot, but what I know isn't the best of news. I don't have the time to go into it right now as I have a lot more phone calls to make tonight," Henry replied, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he'd seen more than he was sharing. "If you can't tell us what's going on, then why are you calling?" Gail pressed, her patience wearing thin with the cryptic nature of the call. "I'm calling to let you know that there's a big group of us down here on Hatteras who are making plans to come up your way in the next few days. We're going to block off the bridge north of you, securing Bodhi Island," Henry explained, his plan coming into focus with each word. "And then what?" Gail asked, her arms crossed over her chest as she evaluated the stranger's intentions. "We're going to mount a rescue," Henry stated simply, the words landing like a life preserver thrown to drowning swimmers. The group looked to each other with a wave of happiness. For the first time, it was clear to them that they weren't alone. They weren't just 6 people trapped in a grocery store waiting for the inevitable. They were part of a larger community of survivors, working together to weather the storm. "What do you need from us?" Gail asked. "At the moment, nothing, but you have a prime location that I assume is secure," Henry replied, his voice suggesting he was already several steps ahead in his planning. "It is," Gail confirmed, pride evident in her voice. "Good. Once I have a better idea of what the plan is, I'll give you a call and fill you in on how you can help. In the meantime, kick back and crack open a cold one for me," Henry instructed, his tone lightening slightly. "Henry, if you clear the island and get us out of here, I'll set aside a whole case of beer for you," Gail promised, a rare smile spreading across her usually serious features. "You are quickly rising up the charts on my favorite person in the world list. Just hang tight and I'll be in touch," Henry responded, the smile evident in his voice even through the phone line. The line clicked dead as the group breathed a sigh of relief. The knowledge that others were out there, organized, planning, working toward rescue, changed everything. Their isolation had been the heaviest burden to bear, and now that weight was lifting. After a few moments, Gail took the floor, clapping her hands together decisively. "Well, you heard the man. Help's on the way, and all we gotta do is kick back and crack open a cold one. I'll grab a 6-pack from the cooler if somebody wants to grab a cake from the deli for dessert." Everybody let out an excited cheer as they exited the office, their minds at ease after receiving the good news that help was on the way. The end.